The Silence of the Lambs. Imagine hunting a killer, and the only person who can help you catch him is another killer. Picture this. You're a rookie FBI agent, and your job is to crawl inside the mind of a murderer by sitting face to face with someone who's far worse. That's the nightmare Clarice Starling steps into. She's tasked with finding Buffalo Bill, a serial killer who abducts women and skins them. The FBI has no leads, except one man locked away in a cell. Dr. Hannibal Lecter. Lecter isn't just a killer. He's a genius, a psychiatrist who understands human fear, desire, weakness, and devours it, literally. When Clarice first meets him, he's polite, articulate, almost charming. But behind the glass wall of his cage, there's something in his eyes. Not madness, but hunger. Their conversations are battles. Lecter offers her cryptic clues about Buffalo Bill, but in exchange, he demands pieces of her soul. He forces her to talk about her childhood, her trauma, the screaming of lambs in the night. Every word is a test. Is she strong enough to play his game? Or will she be consumed by it? Meanwhile, the book cuts to Buffalo Bill himself, alone in his basement sewing a woman's suit out of skin, lowering his next victim into a pit, telling her to rub lotion on her skin. It's not just disturbing, it's intimate. You're trapped in that house, with him, and you can't look away. What makes The Silence of the Lambs so terrifying isn't just the violence. It's the way it forces us to look at human monsters. Hannibal Lecter isn't a slasher villain hiding in the shadows. He's brilliant, refined, civilized. Buffalo Bill isn't a demon. He's a man, broken, twisted, horrifyingly human. And that's the true horror. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it smiles, speaks softly, and stares at you through bulletproof glass. Clarice survives the hunt, but the silence she carries, the screaming of those lambs, never goes away. Perfume. The story of a murderer. Jean-Baptiste Grenouille is born in the filth of 18th century Paris, unwanted and unloved. From the first moment of his life, he is a survivor, a rat in human form. But Grenouille is no ordinary child. He has a gift, or perhaps a curse, an unmatched sense of smell. He can detect the faintest trace of a flower a mile away, or the unique musk of a person passing through a crowd. Scents are his language, his world, his obsession. But there's something missing. Grenouille himself has no scent. To others he's a blank, an absence, a shadow. It feeds his alienation, making him believe that to truly exist, he must craft a fragrance so perfect it will grant him power, love, and recognition. As he grows, Grenouille becomes a perfumer's apprentice, mastering the craft. But he's not content with flowers and oils. He hungers for the essence of humans, specifically the radiant, intoxicating scent of young women. His obsession leads him down a path of murder. One by one, he kills virgins, extracting their fragrance by methods as gruesome as they are meticulous. Each death is not just a crime, but a step toward his ultimate creation, a perfume that can command the hearts of all who inhale it. The climax comes when Grenouille is captured, sentenced to execution for his killings. But instead of meeting the guillotine, he unleashes his masterpiece. Just one drop of his perfume turns the jeering mob into worshippers. They collapse in ecstasy, overwhelmed by love and adoration for him. He is no longer a criminal. He is a god. In that moment, Grenouille holds absolute power, and yet, it means nothing. He feels no joy, no satisfaction. Even as he becomes adored by all, he remains empty. His greatest triumph exposes the hollowness inside him. Power cannot replace the love he was denied at birth. The novel's ending is as shocking as it is poetic. Grenouille returns to the place of his birth, surrounded by thieves and beggars. Instead of fleeing, he pours the remainder of his perfume over himself. The crowd, entranced, tears him apart in a frenzy of love so pure it becomes cannibalistic. They consume him until nothing remains. Grenouille achieves his goal. He is loved so completely that people cannot help but devour him. And yet, it is also the ultimate irony. To be adored, he had to cease to exist. Watchmen. The story begins like a murder mystery. A masked vigilante, the comedian, is thrown to his death. But his death is just the first crack in a much bigger nightmare. In Alan Moore's Watchmen, superheroes aren't gods. They're flawed, broken, and terrifyingly human. The narrative jumps between the lives of retired vigilantes. Rorschach, the brutal detective who sees the world in black and white. Dr. Manhattan, a literal god who's drifting away from humanity. Ozymandias, the so-called smartest man alive. And Laurie and Dan, who cling to their old costumes to find meaning in a decaying world. At its heart, Watchmen asks one question: who watches the Watchmen? If people with masks and powers enforce justice, who holds them accountable? That question leads to one of the darkest endings in graphic novel history. Ozymandias, seeing the world spiraling toward nuclear war, devises a plan to save humanity. His solution isn't peace or diplomacy, it's mass murder. He fakes an alien attack on New York City, killing millions instantly. The horror unites the United States and the Soviet Union against a common enemy, ending the Cold War in one bloody stroke. When the other heroes uncover the plan, it's already too late. They stand in the ruins, realizing that despite the atrocity, it worked. Nuclear annihilation has been averted. But at what cost? Dr. Manhattan, detached yet godlike, agrees to leave Earth. Laurie and Dan resign themselves to living quietly, unable to undo what's been done. And Rorschach, the one man who refuses to compromise, is vaporized by Manhattan rather than allow him to expose the truth. The ending is devastating not because of the violence, but because of the moral vacuum it leaves. Ozymandias asks Manhattan if he did the right thing. Manhattan replies with chilling ambiguity, "Nothing ever ends." And that's the real horror. The so-called savior of humanity slaughtered millions, and the world will never know. Peace is built on a lie. The heroes we look to for justice became complicit in silence. Watchmen ends not with triumph, but with dread. The understanding that the world is safe only as long as a monstrous secret is kept, and that human nature ensures it won't stay hidden forever. The crash. What if the car crash wasn't an accident? J.G. Ballard's Crash isn't just disturbing. It's deliberately designed to make you recoil. At its core, it's about a group of people who find sexual and spiritual meaning in car crashes. For them, twisted metal and shattered glass aren't accidents. They're a new language of intimacy. The narrator, named after Ballard himself, falls under the spell of Vaughn, a charismatic, deranged man obsessed with the idea that technology and desire have fused in the modern world. Vaughn dreams of the ultimate crash, a collision with Elizabeth Taylor, immortalized in fire, blood, and fame. Through Vaughn, the narrator becomes immersed in this underground cult of eroticized violence. They reenact crashes, fetishize scars, and worship the mingling of machine and flesh. The language is clinical, almost sterile, which makes the grotesque acts described feel even more shocking. What begins as horror slowly morphs into inevitability. The more Ballard's narrator is pulled in, the more he sees crashes not as tragedies, but as sacred moments of transformation. Highways become cathedrals, crumpled bodies become icons. And do you know the darkest part isn't just the deaths? It's the philosophy underpinning them. The characters believe that in a society dominated by technology, accidents are the purest form of human expression left. Each crash is both a ritual and a prophecy, a way of breaking free from the numbness of everyday life by embracing annihilation. The climax comes when Vaughn, in his pursuit of transcendence, stages his final collision. He crashes his car deliberately and dies, his body fused with the wreckage he worshipped. It should feel like an ending, but instead, it feels like a beginning. The narrator doesn't recoil from Vaughn's death. He embraces it. In the closing pages, he's already fantasizing about his own crashes, his own future deaths, with the same eerie devotion. What started as someone else's obsession has become his own religion. The novel ends without redemption, without hope, just a chilling certainty. In this world, technology, sex, and death are no longer separate. They've merged into one. Ballard doesn't offer resolution. He leaves the reader trapped in the same place as his characters, staring at the wreckage, half in horror, half in awe, wondering if this is the true face of the future. Akira Katsuhiro Otomo. The end of the world doesn't come with fire falling from the sky. It begins in Neo-Tokyo, a city rebuilt after a mysterious explosion destroyed the old one. A city where gangs roam the streets, politicians drown in corruption, and the military hides secrets too dangerous to speak of. That's the world of Akira. At its heart are two boys, Kaneda and Tetsuo. Friends, rivals, brothers in arms in a biker gang tearing through the neon streets. But when Tetsuo collides with a strange child during a chase, everything changes. The accident awakens something inside him, a power so destructive, so uncontrollable, that it threatens to consume not just him, but the entire city. Tetsuo isn't just strong, he's evolving. His psychic abilities grow faster than his mind can handle. What begins as a surge of strength becomes hallucinations, uncontrollable rages, and the terrifying sense that he's no longer fully human. Kaneda, reckless but loyal, is pulled into the fight, not just for Tetsuo's soul, but for Neo-Tokyo's survival. Hovering over them all is the legend of Akira, the name whispered like a curse, the child whose powers caused the original Tokyo explosion. Officially, Akira doesn't exist. In reality, he's been hidden away, a weapon too dangerous to kill, too powerful to unleash. But when Tetsuo's mutation spirals out of control, the military's desperate grip on Akira begins to fail. Otomo doesn't hold back. Akira is body horror on a cosmic scale. Tetsuo's transformation isn't sleek or heroic. It's grotesque. Flesh and machinery twist together, his body becoming a monstrous mass that mirrors his collapsing humanity. But beneath the violence and spectacle, Akira is a story about control. Who holds power? The government that hides the truth? The rebels who want to expose it? Or the individuals who discover forces inside themselves too great to master? The manga was published in the 80s, but it feels like prophecy. Questions about authoritarianism, technology, and the destructive hunger for progress pulse through every panel. And unlike most stories of heroes versus villains, Akira offers no easy answers. Just chaos, rebirth, and the haunting suggestion that destruction may be the only path to evolution. Akira isn't just a manga. It's a nuclear explosion on the page, and once you've read it, you don't walk away the same. The Collector. Frederick Clegg is a socially awkward clerk, invisible to the world, until he wins a fortune in the lottery. But instead of building a life, he uses his newfound wealth to indulge a twisted obsession. Miranda Gray, a young art student he's been watching from afar. Frederick convinces himself he's not like other men. He doesn't want to hurt Miranda, he tells himself. He just wants to collect her, the way he collects butterflies. Quietly, methodically, he buys a secluded country house and prepares a locked basement room. When he finally kidnaps Miranda, he frames it as an act of love. He gives her clothes, books, even art supplies, but always under his control, always in his collection. The horror of The Collector lies in the psychology. Frederick doesn't see himself as a villain. He insists he's misunderstood, that Miranda will grow to love him if given time. Miranda, meanwhile, struggles between defiance and survival. She tries to manipulate him, to play along just enough to escape. But every plan collapses against Frederick's stubborn delusion. As weeks pass, the walls close in. Miranda grows weaker, both physically and emotionally. A brief glimmer of hope comes when she nearly escapes. But Frederick's paranoia catches her. He grows more controlling, more desperate to keep his butterfly pinned in place. The novel's ending is devastating. Miranda falls ill with pneumonia, her body wasting away in the damp basement. Frederick, faced with a choice, refuses to call a doctor. He convinces himself it's her fault for not loving him. When she finally dies, he buries her quietly, showing no real grief, only disappointment that his experiment failed. And then comes the coldest twist. Frederick, narrating without a shred of remorse, begins to plot again. He's already found another young woman, another potential specimen. Miranda wasn't the one, but maybe the next girl will be. The collector ends not with justice, but with the terrifying promise of repetition. Frederick walks free, unpunished, ready to begin his cycle of obsession and control all over again. It's not just a story of kidnapping, it's a story of how self-delusion and entitlement can twist into pure evil. The monster isn't a stranger lurking in the shadows. It's the quiet man no one notices, waiting for his next collection. Beloved. Imagine feeding your child, bathing her, talking with her every day, and then remembering. You killed her years ago. That's the horror of Beloved. Beloved is set after the American Civil War, following Seath, a woman who escaped slavery with her children. Freedom should mean safety, but the past won't let her go, because when slave catchers came for her family, Seath made a choice, death over bondage. She tried to kill all her children so they wouldn't be dragged back. Only one died, her baby girl. Years later, Seath's house is haunted. The baby's ghost stomps, cries, and screams through the walls. And then a young woman appears. She calls herself Beloved. She knows things she shouldn't know. She behaves like a child trapped in a grown body. She is the baby come back. But Morrison doesn't write Beloved as a monster. She's seductive, fragile, terrifying, needy. She wants Seath's love, her attention, her whole self. And Seath gives it, letting Beloved consume her life while the community around her watches in silence. The horror isn't the supernatural. It's the weight of slavery's trauma, a system so brutal it twists love itself into violence. Seth's murder isn't treated as insanity, but as a consequence of a world where mothers had no control over their children's bodies, where death felt like the only mercy left. Beloved is gothic, yes, but it's also history, the kind of horror America would rather forget. Morrison forces you to sit with it, to see how trauma never stays buried. It comes back, it eats at you, it names itself, and it asks, "You loved me enough to kill me, but will you love me enough to live with me?" A Little Life. A Little Life begins like a familiar story of friendship. 4 young men in New York chasing careers, love, and meaning. There's J.B. the artist, Willem the actor, Malcolm the architect, and Jude the quiet, brilliant lawyer. But slowly, the narrative narrows, until all the light and weight of the book falls on Jude Saint. Francis. Jude is extraordinary, intellectually gifted, professionally successful. But his brilliance hides a devastating secret. His childhood was not just difficult, it was unspeakably abusive. A life of exploitation, cruelty, and trauma left him scarred, both physically and emotionally. The people who should have cared for him instead treated him as less than human. What follows is not a story of healing, but of survival. Jude builds walls of silence around his past, even with the friends who love him most. He endures, but he cannot escape. Self-harm becomes his constant companion. Every kindness shown to him is met with suspicion. Every relationship poisoned by the belief that he is unworthy of love. For a time, it seems like Willem might save him. Their friendship deepens into something more, and Jude experiences fleeting moments of peace. But tragedy strikes again. Willem dies suddenly in a car accident, and with him goes Jude's last tether to hope. The final act is a slow, heartbreaking collapse. Jude cannot bear the weight of his memories, his guilt, his self-hatred. Surrounded by friends who would give anything to save him, he retreats further into despair. His body deteriorates from years of self-inflicted damage, and finally, he makes the decision that ends his story. he takes his own life. The novel doesn't end with redemption or closure. Instead, it leaves us with Willem's words, remembered by those left behind. "You were the only thing I wanted." Jude was loved, but he could never believe it. What makes A Little Life so devastating is not just the tragedy, but the relentless way it refuses to soften the blow. It forces readers to confront the truth that not every wound heals, and not every story of survival ends in light. Sometimes, the darkness wins. It is one of the most harrowing, emotionally exhausting endings in modern literature. Unforgettable because it feels both cruel and painfully real. Red Dragon. Before Hannibal Lecter became a pop culture icon, there was another monster stalking the shadows. In Red Dragon, Thomas Harris doesn't just invent the serial killer thriller, he perfects it. The story follows Will Graham, a retired FBI profiler who's been scarred by his past. He's one of the only people who can understand killers because he can think like them. He sees what they see, feels what they feel, and it almost destroyed him. But now, he's pulled back into the hunt. A new killer, nicknamed the Tooth Fairy, is slaughtering families. He doesn't just kill, he stages them. He bites them. He worships something bigger than himself. To catch him, Will has to do the unthinkable. Consult with Hannibal Lecter, the cannibal psychiatrist he barely survived capturing. Lecter doesn't give answers. He gives riddles. He toys with Will. Because Lecter knows the truth, that Will isn't just chasing a monster. He's staring into a mirror. The Tooth Fairy, Francis Dolarhyde, is one of the most terrifying creations in crime fiction. He's not a caricature. He's broken. Abused as a child, obsessed with transformation. He believes by killing, he's becoming something greater. The Red Dragon. And Harris makes you sit inside his head page after page until you almost understand him. Almost. The horror of Red Dragon isn't just the blood, it's the psychology. The way it forces you to realize how thin the line is between hunter and hunted, sanity and madness. Will isn't just fighting Dolarhyde. He's fighting the part of himself that's too good at understanding evil. Red Dragon launched a genre and left behind a legacy of villains we're still haunted by today. But what makes it unforgettable is that it doesn't let you hide from the darkest truth. That monsters aren't born. They're made. It's true. And sometimes, they're made by the people hunting them. In the Miso Soup, Tokyo at night feels alive. Neon signs, hostess clubs, pachinko machines clattering. But in the Miso Soup, that glow hides something rotten. The story follows Kenji, a young Japanese tour guide who makes his living escorting foreign men through Tokyo's seedy nightlife. He's used to weird requests. Sex clubs, gambling dens, late-night bars. But when he meets Frank, an American tourist, something feels wrong. Frank tips too much, smiles too wide. He's eager, polite, and completely off. Kenji can't quite explain it, but the dread builds. As the nights go on, the tension turns unbearable. Murakami makes Tokyo's neon streets feel like a haunted maze, every doorway hiding danger. And then Frank shows his true face. The violence when it comes is shocking, sudden, brutal. Frank isn't just a killer, he's a void. He commits acts of cruelty with the same casualness as ordering a drink. And the horror isn't only in the gore. It's in how Murakami forces you to sit with Kenji's helplessness, trapped between survival instinct and morbid fascination. The novel asks, what happens when you can't walk away? When you know the person next to you is capable of unspeakable things and you're powerless to stop it? Unlike thrillers that give you resolution, In the Miso Soup leaves you dangling. There's no clean justice, no cathartic ending. It's a novel about violence, but also about cultural alienation, consumerism, and the lies people tell themselves to keep moving through a world that's already cracked. You're not sure what's scarier, Frank, or the fact that in a city of millions, no one noticed. Helter Skelter. Helter Skelter isn't fiction. It's the chilling true account of the Manson family murders, written by Vincent Bugliosi, the prosecutor who put Charles Manson behind bars. And its ending is all the more terrifying because it really happened. In the late 1960s, Manson transformed himself from a failed musician into a cult leader, gathering disaffected young people around him at a desert commune called Spahn Ranch. To them, he was more than a man. He was a prophet. He preached that an apocalyptic race war was coming, one he called Helter Skelter, borrowing the name from a Beatles song. Manson believed, or convinced his followers to believe, that the murders they committed would ignite this war. In 1969, his family invaded Los Angeles homes, killing actress Sharon Tate and 4 others in one of the most brutal massacres in modern memory, followed by the LaBianca murders the next night. Bugliosi's book details not only the horrific crimes, but also the surreal circus of the trial. Manson carved an X into his forehead, turned the courtroom into a stage, and exerted a frightening grip over his followers, who were willing to kill or die for him. The final chapters focus not on a twist of redemption, but on the permanence of the horror. Manson and several followers are convicted, sentenced to death. But when California abolishes the death penalty, their sentences are commuted to life. The ending delivers no neat closure. Manson remains alive, unrepentant, still gathering admirers from behind bars. His followers, some equally unrepentant, carry his ideology into the decades that follow. Even Bugliosi, the man who exposed the madness in court, admits that Manson's shadow lingers long after the verdict. That's the darkest part of Helter Skelter. The story doesn't end with the trial. It leaves readers with the realization that evil doesn't vanish when locked away. Manson's philosophy, a toxic mix of charisma, manipulation, and apocalyptic belief, remains a scar on American culture. Unlike the other stories we've covered, this one doesn't fade into allegory or metaphor. It sits uncomfortably in the real world. Party Monster. The 1990s, New York club scene was supposed to be glamorous. Neon lights, outrageous costumes, parties that went until sunrise. But in Party Monster, James Street. James shows what happens when excess turns toxic. The story centers around Michael Alig, a club promoter who became infamous for turning nightlife into a circus of chaos. He and James Street. James weren't just throwing parties, they were building a cult. The club kids ruled Manhattan with glitter, drugs, and costumes so outrageous that the scene itself felt like theater. But beneath the makeup was rot. The endless drugs, the blurred lines between performance and reality, the obsession with fame at any cost, it all spiraled toward disaster. The breaking point came with the murder of Angel Melendez, a fellow club kid. Michael and his roommate killed him during a drug-fueled rage, dismembered his body, and dumped it in the Hudson River. And yet, the parties didn't stop right away. People whispered, rumors spread, but the glitter covered the blood. What makes Party Monster so disturbing is how casual it all feels. Murder isn't portrayed as a shocking twist. It's just another night in a scene where boundaries were already gone. The culture itself was complicit, feeding off spectacle, rewarding excess, ignoring consequences. James writes it all with a mix of biting humor and chilling detachment, making you laugh one moment and recoil the next. The result is a story that feels like a high, then a crash. It's not about one murder, it's about how fame, drugs, and ego can create a bubble where reality doesn't matter, until it shatters. You're left asking, was the real monster Michael Alig, or the scene that cheered him on until it was too late? Ubik. Ubik begins like a standard sci-fi noir, but ends in one of the most disorienting, haunting ways in the genre. Joe Chip works for a company that employs inertials, people with psychic powers designed to counteract telepaths. But the real strangeness begins after a business trip gone wrong. A bomb explodes, killing some of the team. At least, that's what seems to happen. In the aftermath, reality itself starts to break down. Cigarettes crumble into dust after a single puff. Coins turn into worthless tokens. Technology regresses backward in time. TVs turn into radios, cars into horse carts, refrigerators into ice boxes. Every day the world feels older, decaying, collapsing into earlier eras. One by one, Joe's colleagues start dying, their bodies mummifying rapidly, as if the passage of time itself is devouring them. Messages from their dead employer, Glenn Runsider, appear everywhere, in graffiti, in advertisements, even on coins. Is Runsider alive while they are dead, or are they all trapped in some half-life state, lingering between existence and oblivion? The only thread holding Joe together is a mysterious product called Ubik, an aerosol spray that seems to preserve life and reality against the decay. Every time Joe is on the brink of disintegration, Ubik pulls him back. But what is it? A product? A god? A hallucination? By the end, the ground gives way completely. Runsider, who seemed to be communicating from beyond the grave, finds himself holding a coin stamped with Joe Chip's face, the same way Joe once found Runsider's image staring up at him. The implication is chilling. Maybe Runsider is the one alive, and Joe is the one trapped in half-life, or maybe they all are. Maybe reality itself is just another layer of half-life, with no way of knowing what's real anymore. And Ubik? It's never fully explained. Sometimes it's a can of spray. Sometimes it's described in quasi-religious terms. An eternal force, a caretaker, a kind of cosmic glue holding together what little order remains. Exquisite Corpse. Exquisite Corpse follows two men. Andrew Compton, a serial killer in prison for unspeakable crimes, and Jay Byrne, a wealthy recluse in New Orleans with the exact same hunger. Both men escape their cages, one literal, one societal, and when they finally meet, it's not rivalry, it's recognition. They fall into each other like lovers, except their intimacy isn't romance, it's murder, torture, cannibalism. This isn't horror dressed up in metaphor, it's graphic, brutal, unflinching. Poppy Z. Bright doesn't look away from the details because the point is that you can't look away either. You're stuck in a room with these men, forced to hear their thoughts, see their methods, feel the strange tenderness they share while destroying lives. But what makes Exquisite Corpse more than just shock is how it frames desire and death as inseparable. The killers see murder not as violence, but as a kind of art. Exquisite, intimate, permanent. The corpses they leave behind are masterpieces. And woven through this is a subplot about Tran, a Vietnamese-American man diagnosed with HIV who crosses paths with these predators. His story grounds the nightmare in real-life horror. The 1990s AIDS crisis, alienation, and the way society turns suffering into silence. The novel forces you into questions you don't want to ask. What does it mean when two killers treat each other as soulmates? What happens when love itself is devouring? There's no relief or clean justice, just bodies and echoes, and the realization that the line between passion and destruction isn't a line at all. Exquisite Corpse is infamous because it dares to humanize the inhuman, and in doing so, it leaves you wondering if humanity itself might be the darkest thing in the room. The Book of the New Sun. On a far future Earth called Earth, the sun is dimming, the oceans are shrinking, and civilizations live among ruins they no longer understand. Towers made of glass, machines like gods, relics that no one remembers how to use. Our guide is Hyperion, an apprentice torturer. His job is to keep prisoners alive through pain, to carve confessions out of bodies without letting them die. He's supposed to be merciless, detached, a perfect instrument of suffering. But he breaks the rule. He shows kindness to a prisoner. And for that crime, he's exiled, cast out into a dying world, carrying nothing but his tools and his memories. And that's where the Book of the New Sun begins, a journey that feels like a hallucination. Hyperion wanders through cities built on ruins of forgotten empires, meets witches, warlords, mutants, and beings who might not even be human. He picks up relics of lost ages, weapons and artifacts with powers that defy explanation. And always, he tells us the story in his own words. But here's the trap. Severian is not a reliable narrator. He lies, he forgets, he rewrites. His truth bends around him like the ruins he walks through. Sometimes he admits details only after hundreds of pages. Sometimes he leaves out entire pieces of horror until it's too late to look away. The result is unsettling. You're inside a world where knowledge has rotted away, where words themselves are fossils, where a guild of torturers might be the only functioning institution left, and you're following a man who tells you everything, but maybe nothing at all. At its core, Wolf's series is about memory, power, and decay. How history collapses when nobody remembers it right, and how easy it is for cruelty to survive when it's dressed as ritual. And Severian, he's not a hero or even a villain. He's just what's left when the sun runs out. The Girl Next Door. The Girl Next Door begins in the 1950s suburbs, the kind of place painted with white fences and ice cream trucks. The narrator, David, is a boy living in that neighborhood. He remembers one summer, the summer Meg and her sister came to live with their aunt, Ruth. At first, Ruth is just the cool mom. She lets the kids drink beer, swear, hang out in her basement. But something in her shifts, or maybe it was always there. Cruelty begins as small punishments, snide remarks, taking food away, locking Meg in the basement, and then it escalates. Ruth encourages her sons and the neighborhood kids to join in. What starts as teasing becomes torture, burns, beatings, degradation so relentless you forget these are children. David watches, sometimes complicit, sometimes horrified, always powerless. What makes The Girl Next Door unbearable is that it's not dressed in gothic exaggeration. It's suburban, casual. Ruth's cruelty grows in the same rooms where people watch TV and eat dinner, and the kids join in because authority told them it was okay, because cruelty feels like power when you're young and powerless. Ketchum based the novel on a real crime, the murder of Sylvia Likens in 1965. That truth seeps through every page. The book doesn't soften the blows or give you comforting illusions of rescue. It drags you into the basement and leaves you there with Meg. David isn't just haunted by what he saw. He's haunted by what he didn't stop. And that's the sharpest knife the novel leaves in you. Horror not just at evil, but at the silence of those who let it happen. The Girl Next Door isn't scary because it's extreme. It's scary because it shows how ordinary people, neighbors, friends, children, can become monsters when cruelty is normalized. And it asks, if you were there, watching, what would you have done? The last answer. Imagine this. You die, heart stops, brain shuts down, darkness, and then awareness, not heaven, not hell, not nothing. A voice. It calls itself the ultimate intelligence, an entity older than time, built out of physics itself. It tells you something terrifying. You will never stop thinking. Ever. Your body is gone, but your mind will last forever. Trapped in eternity as fuel for the universe's greatest computer. At first, you ask the natural questions. Why me? What's the point? The intelligence explains. You will think for eternity. Your ideas, your questions, your creativity, all of it sustains me. This is your purpose now. And when the narrator asks if he can rest, or sleep, or dissolve into nothing, the voice says no. Death does not mean peace. Death means service. At first, the narrator clings to the idea that this might be paradise. No pain, hunger, or aging. Just pure thought. But the more he reflects, the more it curdles. Eternity is not bliss. It is endless repetition. Every memory he replays will grow stale. Every idea will eventually be exhausted. He will never escape the prison of awareness. That's when horror sets in. He realizes he would rather not exist at all than endure infinity. He begs the intelligence to let him die a final death, but the being refuses. Suicide, madness, even unconsciousness, all are forbidden. Awareness is mandatory. So he turns to defiance. If he cannot die, then he will spend eternity plotting one thing: the destruction of the intelligence itself. To find a thought, a paradox, a concept so complete that it can break the very mind keeping him alive. His rebellion is not an action, but an imagination, weaponizing the only thing left to him. That's the last answer. Not immortality and enlightenment, but defiance in the face of eternity. Asimov flips the dream of eternal life into a curse, showing us that the worst fate isn't dying. It's never being allowed to. Lord of the Flies. The plane crashes on a deserted island. No adults, no rules. Just a group of boys, suddenly free. At first, it looks like paradise. Palm trees, beaches, fruit to eat. They laugh, they play. They make promises about working together until rescue comes. But freedom rots faster than fruit. Ralph tries to lead, to build shelters, to keep a signal fire burning. Jack doesn't care. Jack wants to hunt. He paints his face, sharpens sticks, and tells the others that meat matters more than rescue. Slowly, boys who once played tag in schoolyards start following him, chanting, dancing, losing themselves in the rhythm of the hunt. Fear becomes the island's real ruler. They invent a monster in the jungle, the beast, and the belief in it warps everything. It doesn't matter that the beast isn't real. What matters is that they act like it is, and soon, that fear makes them into the very thing they're afraid of. Simon, the quiet one, finds the truth. The beast is just them, the violence inside their own hearts. But when he stumbles out of the trees to tell the others, they're too far gone. The chanting, the firelight, the frenzy. They mistake him for the monster and beat him to death with their bare hands. The descent doesn't stop there. Piggy, the voice of reason, is killed next, crushed by a boulder as Jack's tribe laughs. Ralph runs for his life across an island now burning with the fire they set to smoke him out. And then, rescue. A naval officer appears. The boys, painted like savages, crying, shaking, suddenly remember they were children once. Lord of the Flies isn't about survival. It's about how thin civilization really is. Strip away structure, strip away authority, and the veneer cracks. What's underneath isn't innocence. It's blood, fire, and the echo of a chant. Because the beast was never out there in the jungle. It was always in them. Zodiac. Robert Graysmith's Zodiac isn't just a true crime book. It's a descent into obsession. Graysmith, a political cartoonist for the San Francisco Chronicle, was drawn into the Zodiac case when the killer began sending taunting letters to the paper in the late 1960s. These weren't confessions. They were puzzles, filled with cryptic ciphers, strange symbols, and boasts of murders both proven and unproven. The book chronicles not only the crimes, but the psychological grip the Zodiac held over California. Victims were gunned down at lovers' lanes, stabbed near lakes, or simply vanished, and each time, the killer reminded the public that he was still out there watching. Unlike other murderers, the Zodiac seemed less interested in killing than in being seen. His real weapon was fear, and his letters turned the entire Bay Area into an audience. As Graysmith digs deeper, the investigation becomes a maze. Dozens of suspects appear and vanish, each with circumstantial ties but no definitive proof. The most notorious is Arthur Lee Allen, a man with unsettling behavior, cryptic comments, and a background that seems to fit the killer's profile. Graysmith builds a mountain of coincidences pointing toward Allen, his watch brand, his handwriting quirks, even his proximity to crime scenes. But here's the darkest part: nothing is ever proven. The Zodiac slips through the cracks of police jurisdictions, leaves evidence too flimsy for conviction, and thrives on the paranoia he creates. Even when Allen dies decades later, the case remains unresolved. DNA, fingerprints, ballistics. None of it is airtight. The ending of Zodiac is not catharsis, but suffocation. Graysmith dedicates years, even decades of his life to solving the mystery, at the cost of his marriage and his peace of mind. And yet, the final page offers no resolution. The killer was never caught. The codes were never fully cracked. The Zodiac lived out his life, reading the headlines, watching his legend grow, knowing he had beaten everyone. Child of God. Deep in the hills of Tennessee lives Lester Ballard, a man cast out of society, stripped of dignity, and left to rot on the edges of civilization. McCarthy paints him not as a villain born, but as something society created, a pariah, beaten down until his humanity disintegrates. And what emerges is terrifying. Lester doesn't just live on the margins, he descends into them. At first, he's simply isolated, wandering the forests, abandoned cabins, and caves of Appalachia. But his loneliness festers, mutating into grotesque obsession. He becomes a scavenger of corpses, a necrophile, a grotesque child of God, whose very existence mirrors humanity's darkest impulses. What makes this novel so disturbing isn't just the depravity of Lester's acts, but the way McCarthy frames him. The prose is biblical, lyrical, even beautiful, forcing us to witness horror in a tone usually reserved for scripture. It's as if we're being asked, is Lester damned by birth, or is he simply reflecting the savagery and decay of the world around him? The caves he hides in become symbols of his regression, burrows of a creature more animal than man. And McCarthy's sparse dialogue, brutal landscapes, and relentless pacing make it impossible to look away, even when every part of you wants to. Child of God unsettles because it removes every comforting illusion about morality and redemption. Lester Ballard is not a monster born in fantasy, but a man created by neglect, cruelty, and exile. And McCarthy refuses to let us forget that, no matter how far he falls, he is still one of us. This is what happens when society abandons its own. Hyperion. Most sci-fi futures imagine sleek cities, perfect machines, and progress. Hyperion imagines something stranger, and far darker. Dan Simmons weaves the story like a modern Canterbury Tales. 7 travelers journeying to the world of Hyperion, each telling their story along the way. But what ties them together isn't hope, it's the Shrike. The Shrike is a nightmare given form, a towering figure made of metal and blades. It doesn't just kill, it impales its victims on a tree of pain, keeping them alive to suffer for eternity. Entire religions form around it. Armies worship it, and no one knows if it's a god, a demon, or something worse, the future itself. Each pilgrim story adds a layer of dread, a soldier haunted by endless war, a poet whose masterpiece is destroying him, a scholar watching his child regress into infancy. The pain is deeply personal, yet cosmic in scale. Hyperion isn't just a planet. It's a trap, a riddle, a mirror. What makes Hyperion so disturbing is the collision of intimacy and apocalypse. It's not about spaceships and laser battles. It's about how humans carry grief, obsession, and guilt across galaxies, and how those wounds draw them to the Shrike, like moths to fire. Simmons never explains everything. The Shrike remains unknowable. The stories never tie up neatly. Instead, you're left with the sense that the worst horror isn't dying. It's being seen by something that exists beyond time, and realizing your suffering is part of its design. You're not sure if the pilgrims are walking towards salvation or volunteering to be part of the Shrike's harvest. Hyperion proves sci-fi can be as terrifying as any ghost story, because it reminds you that in the vastness of space, pain isn't erased, it's eternal. The Forever War. At its core, the Forever War is about soldiers fighting a war they can never escape, not because of duty, but because of time itself. William Mandela is drafted into an interstellar war against a mysterious alien race called the Torans. The battles are brutal, but the real enemy is relativity. Every time Mandela travels at near light speed to fight, decades or even centuries pass back on Earth. For him, it's just months. For everyone else, it's generations. He survives the bloodshed, but when he returns home, The world he left is unrecognizable. Language has shifted. Social norms are alien. Even the very idea of family has changed. His skills as a soldier mean nothing in civilian life, and the people he knew are dead or aged beyond recognition. He's a veteran without a country, a stranger in his own time. Over and over, he's pulled back into the war. Each deployment catapults him further into the future. Humanity evolves rapidly, not just technologically, but biologically. By the time Mandela returns after centuries of time dilation, most of humanity has become a collective of clones, genetically identical and mentally unified. Individuality itself has become obsolete. Mandela, still human, still stubbornly himself, is now a relic. The very thing he fought to protect, humanity, no longer resembles him at all. And the war? It turns out to be a mistake. After centuries of bloodshed, humans discover the Taurans weren't truly enemies. The conflict was born of a misunderstanding. Millions died in a war that never needed to happen. The final gut punch is quieter, but no less devastating. Mandela finally finds a measure of peace with his lover, Mary Gay, the only thread from his old life. She too was caught in the war and preserved through time dilation. Against impossible odds, they reunite. But even in their reunion, the truth is unavoidable. They're anachronisms, ghosts of a past humanity has already buried. Dearly Devoted Dexter. If you thought the first Dexter novel was dark, Dearly Devoted Dexter drags you into territory where even Dexter himself starts to look almost merciful. That's the twisted magic of Jeff Lindsay's sequel. At the surface, the novel is more of what we know. Dexter Morgan, the Miami blood spatter analyst who hides behind polite smiles while moonlighting as a killer. But what makes this book unforgettable isn't Dexter's code. It's the monster waiting for him in the shadows. Enter Dr. Danko. He isn't just a villain. He's nightmare fuel. Danko kidnaps his victims, drugs them into paralysis, and then mutilates them piece by piece. Fingers, arms, legs, until nothing recognizable remains except a shell of a human being, forced to live in eternal humiliation. These are not quick kills. They are orchestrated acts of cruelty, designed not just to end lives, but to erase identities. In comparison, Dexter's swift and surgical murders feel almost humane, and that moral whiplash is exactly why this book gets under your skin. What makes it worse is how personal the story feels. Danko isn't some distant horror. He circles close to Dexter's world, targeting law enforcement, even getting dangerously near those Dexter pretends to love. Suddenly, the predator becomes the reluctant protector, and we, the readers, find ourselves rooting for a killer. Not because we like his code, but because the alternative is far more terrifying. That emotional tug-of-war is where Lindsay traps you. But here's the kicker. You're laughing while all this unfolds. Dexter's narration is witty, sardonic, and almost charming. His inner commentary is so darkly funny that you find yourself chuckling at the same time someone's getting dismembered. That's the insidious brilliance. Lindsay pulls you into Dexter's perspective until you're complicit. You laugh, and then you catch yourself, realizing you've sided with a murderer. And that's why Dearly Devoted Dexter stands out as one of the darkest crime thrillers of its era. It doesn't just show you horror, it makes you empathize with it, even prefer it. It asks the most uncomfortable question of all. In a world filled with monsters, are we really okay letting one monster protect us from another? Columbine. Most people think they know the story of Columbine. 2 teenagers, trench coats, guns, and a school forever scarred. But Dave Cullen's Columbine rips apart the myths and forces you to confront a truth far darker than what the media sold us. This isn't just a retelling of the 1999 school shooting. It's an autopsy of how horror spreads, not only in hallways, but in headlines, and in the way we process tragedy as a culture. From the start, Cullen dismantles one of the biggest lies, that the killers were bullied outcasts seeking revenge. In reality, Eric Harris wasn't a victim. He was a budding psychopath, charming enough to manipulate everyone around him. Dylan Klebold, his partner, was suicidal, consumed by despair, but unable to pull away from Eric's gravitational pull. Together, they became a lethal storm. And that's where Cullen excels. He doesn't sensationalize. He shows you the cold psychology, the chilling planning, and the devastating inevitability. But the horror doesn't stop at the shooters. The book takes you into the chaos of the day itself. Teachers barricading classrooms, students hiding under tables, praying to survive, parents gathering outside, clinging to hope as misinformation spread like wildfire. The tragedy was not only in the violence, but in the confusion. News reports invented stories of goth kids, satanic cults, and even supposed hit lists that never existed. Cullen shows how quickly narrative overtook fact, and how those myths shaped how we talk about school shootings to this day. And then comes the aftermath. Survivors grappling with PTSD. Parents haunted by survivors' guilt. A community desperate to heal but unable to make sense of the senseless. It's raw, it's ugly, and it's the part we rarely see because it's too uncomfortable. Yet Cullen forces us to look. What makes Columbine truly chilling isn't just that it's about a school shooting, it's that it's about the fragility of truth. It reminds us how easily we accept comforting lies over horrifying reality. It asks a terrifying question. If Eric and Dylan had been a little luckier, if their bombs had gone off as planned, would we even be able to comprehend the scale of their destruction? Columbine doesn't let you turn away, and that's why it's one of the darkest, most important books of our time. The Shadow over Innsmouth. The town isn't on most maps, and that's not by accident. In The Shadow over Innsmouth, Lovecraft takes you to a decaying seaside village where everything feels just a little off. The streets are cracked, the houses sag, and the people, their faces don't look quite right. Eyes too wide, mouths too slack, skin too pale, almost scaly. The locals call it the Innsmouth look. Outsiders call it a reason to leave. Our narrator stumbles into Innsmouth while traveling through New England, and what he finds isn't just poverty or decay, it's worship. The townsfolk bow to the Deep Ones, ancient sea-dwelling beings older than civilization. In exchange for gold and fish beyond measure, the townspeople pledged loyalty, and something far more disturbing: blood. Generations of marriages between humans and the Deep Ones created hybrids, children born looking human at first, but as they age, their bodies betray them, limbs elongate, skin slickens, eyes bulge, and eventually, they abandon the surface world entirely, slipping into the ocean to live forever beneath the waves. The narrator's unease grows as he pieces it together. The odd stares, the whispered prayers, the locked doors at night. Then comes the reveal. Innsmouth isn't a dying town at all. It's a breeding ground, and the people aren't hiding their deformities. They're waiting for the day when the ocean calls them home. The story builds to pure paranoia. Our narrator flees through darkened streets, hunted by shapes in windows and footsteps in alleys, every shadow carrying that glistening, inhuman look. But the true horror comes after he escapes, because he starts to remember his own family history, whispers of strange ancestry, relatives who came from Innsmouth, and slowly he realizes the truth. The bloodline is his too. The Innsmouth look will one day be staring back at him in the mirror. The Shadow over Innsmouth is more than fish monsters and gothic decay. It's about heritage as destiny, the idea that no matter how far you run, can't outrun what you are. Lovecraft wraps it in salt water, sea cults, and creeping dread, but the heart of the story is identity as a prison. And when the ocean comes calling, you don't get to say no. The Killer Clown. You know the story of clowns, balloons, birthday parties, painted smiles. Now imagine one knocking at your door. Some true crime stories disturb because of their violence, others because of their cold psychology. But John Wayne Gacy's story unsettles for another reason, Because he looked like the kind of man you'd never suspect. The friendly neighbor, the community volunteer, the man who dressed up as Pogo the Clown to entertain kids at charity events. But behind the painted smile was one of America's most sadistic killers. From 1972 to 1978, Gacy lured young men and teenage boys into his home under the guise of offering work or mentorship. Once inside, he used tricks, like pretending to perform a magic handcuff act to restrain them. The victims never left. He tortured, assaulted, and murdered at least 33 young men, many of them buried directly beneath his house in the crawl space. What makes Gacy's case so horrifying isn't just the scale of his crimes, but the mask of normalcy he wore. He was active in local politics, ran a contracting business, and was even photographed with First Lady Rosalind Carter. People trusted him. They welcomed him into their homes. They let their kids near him, never realizing the monster beneath the grease paint. The investigation into Gacy unraveled slowly, starting with the disappearance of a 15-year-old boy. Police began watching him, noticing contradictions, catching glimpses of his cruelty. When they finally searched his home, the truth clawed its way into daylight. The smell of decay from beneath the floorboards led to a discovery so sickening it stunned the nation. Dozens of bodies stacked in shallow graves, hidden like discarded trash. The ending is as chilling as the crimes themselves. In 1994, Gacy was executed by lethal injection. His last words? "Kiss my ass." No remorse, no apology, just defiance. Even in death, he refused humanity. The legacy of John Wayne Gacy is twofold. On one side, he is a symbol of unimaginable evil hiding behind an ordinary face. On the other, he is a cautionary tale that monsters don't always look like monsters. The true horror of Gacy's story is that he was real, a living nightmare who proved that the most terrifying mask of all is normalcy. No Country for Old Men. McCarthy's novel is less about a cat-and-mouse chase and more about the inevitability of violence swallowing everything in its path. It starts with a simple choice: Llewellyn Moss stumbling across the aftermath of a drug deal gone wrong. Dead bodies, guns, and a suitcase full of money. He takes the cash, thinking he can outsmart the storm that follows. But what he really takes is a curse. That curse has a name: Anton Chigurh, a hitman who isn't just a killer, but a force of nature. He carries a captive bolt pistol, flipping coins to decide the fate of strangers. To him, death is mathematics, not morality. Once he sets his sights on Moss, it's less a hunt and more an inevitability. The novel plays out like a brutal chess game. Moss runs, Chigurh follows. Sheriff Ed Tom Bell, old and weary, tries to stop the bloodshed, but deep down, he knows he's out of his depth. The world has grown darker, crueler, and more senseless than his old codes of honor can manage. The ending refuses to give the satisfaction of a showdown. Moss is killed off-page, almost casually, as if his story never mattered. Chigurh survives, limping away from a car crash like death itself, scarred but unkillable. Sheriff Bell retires, broken by the realization that there's no order left in the world, no victory, no moral clarity, only chaos. The final gut punch comes in Bell's dream. He dreams of his father carrying a fire in the darkness, guiding him, waiting ahead on horseback with a light. Bell wakes knowing that fire isn't for him anymore. He has lived long enough to see the world surpass him, to see morality drowned in blood and greed. That's the brilliance and cruelty of McCarthy's ending. It denies closure. The villain doesn't fall. The hero doesn't win. Evil isn't punished, and goodness isn't rewarded. Instead, the story mirrors reality. Sometimes the world is simply unfair, and the only thing left is to accept it. Mindhunter. Most horror stories make up their monsters. This one catalogs the real ones. Mindhunter isn't a novel. It's the playbook written by John E. Douglas, the FBI agent who sat across the table from men that nightmares are made of. He didn't just hunt serial killers, he interviewed them, recorded their words, studied their habits, built the very concept of criminal profiling out of cigarette smoke and interrogation room silence. This is where names like Ed Kemper, Jerry Brudos, and BTK stopped being tabloid headlines and became case studies. Douglas noticed patterns, the way some killers relived their murders in chilling detail, the way others staged crime scenes like theater, or the way fantasy always escalated into flesh and blood. The book drags you inside those conversations, not dramatized, not polished, just transcripts that feel too cold, too matter-of-fact to be fiction. Kemper, a giant of a man who murdered his own mother, jokes with Douglas like they're old friends. Brudos describes keeping trophies from his victims like he's showing off baseball cards. And then Douglas walks you through how those interviews changed investigations forever. Profiling wasn't about guessing, it was about patterns. He does this, he'll likely do that. If he chooses this victim, here's what it means. Suddenly, detectives weren't just chasing blood trails, they were chasing psychology. But here's the darkness Mindhunter doesn't let you look away from. These killers are not monsters under the bed. They're men who walked into grocery stores, paid their bills, smiled at neighbors. The mask of normality is part of the terror. Douglas admits the job nearly killed him, mentally, physically. To understand men like this, you have to go to the places in their heads that they live in, places most of us wouldn't come back from. Reading Mindhunter today, you realize how much of that work still applies, how every new killer on the news is just another echo in the patterns Douglas mapped decades ago. It's not horror with jump scares. It's horror that sits across the table, smiling, and asks how your drive-in was. Because sometimes the darkest books aren't the ones imagining evil, they're the ones documenting it. Last exit to Brooklyn. Brooklyn, New York, post-war America, but not the America of picket fences and smiling families. This is the underside. The bars, the factories, the streets filled with violence, addiction, and despair. Hubert Selby Jr.'s Last Exit to Brooklyn doesn't tell one story. It tells several. Fragments of lives, each spiraling in their own way, connected only by the raw brutality of the world around them. You meet the union workers, angry and drunk, their masculinity wrapped up in cruelty. You meet Tralala, a young woman who weaponizes her sexuality until the city devours her in one of the most infamous and disturbing scenes in modern literature. You meet the outsiders, the lost souls, the addicts, and the broken. Each chapter isn't a redemption arc, it's a descent. Selby's prose is jagged, chaotic, almost ungrammatical. He doesn't care about commas or quotation marks. It's raw, like someone scrawling rage and despair directly into your brain. And that's the point. There's no polish here, no comforting distance, just the ugly truth of urban decay. When the book was first published in 1964, it was banned in the UK for obscenity, not because it was graphic for shock's sake, but because it refused to lie. It showed working-class Brooklyn as a place where the American dream was already dead, where poverty breeds violence, where love is just another currency to be spent and discarded. But what makes Last Exit to Brooklyn so dark isn't just the violence or the sex or the degradation. It's the hopelessness, the sense that no matter who you are, man, woman, outsider, insider, the city will break you down eventually. That last exit isn't to somewhere better. It's to nothing at all. There are no heroes here, no light at the end of the tunnel, only people clawing for survival in a world that offers them nothing. And maybe that's why Selby's vision still feels terrifyingly modern, because Brooklyn in the 1960s doesn't look that different from any city today, where the powerless are left to rot in the shadows. The city and the city. Two cities, same space, same streets, same buildings, and yet divided by an invisible border you can never cross. China Mieville's. The City and the City is a murder mystery wrapped inside a nightmare of perception. At first glance, it feels like a standard noir, a detective investigating a brutal death. But then the world unfolds, and you realize this isn't our reality. This is two cities, Basel and Ulcoma, that occupy the exact same geographic space. They overlap physically, yet their citizens are trained from birth to unsee the other city. Imagine walking down a street where half the buildings belong to another world. People from that other world are right there, brushing past you, but you must not acknowledge them. To see them is a crime. It's called breach, and it's punishable by an almost supernatural force that comes for you without warning. This isn't fantasy in the traditional sense. It's a weaponized metaphor for how societies build walls in plain sight. The murder investigation forces Inspector Theodore Borlu to cross the thin, invisible border between Basel and Ulcoma. Every step forward pushes him into danger, because he must navigate the fragile rules of two cities that both exist and don't. And the killer? They exploit the system, slipping through the cracks of perception. The real terror isn't the violence of the crime, but the chilling reminder of how much we ignore in our own world. Poverty, refugees, entire communities. They exist beside us, but we're taught not to see them. What makes the City and the City so dark is its psychological weight. The act of unseeing isn't magical. It's ordinary brainwashing. Citizens are conditioned to ignore what doesn't belong to their city. If you break that conditioning, you risk not just punishment, but the collapse of everything that keeps society orderly. It's dystopia disguised as normality. At its core, The City and the City is a detective story that pretends to solve a murder while really solving nothing. Because the true crime is structural. It's about how entire societies agree to look away, to never question the boundaries, and to punish anyone who dares. So the question Mivia leaves us with isn't, what if two cities existed in one? It's something far more unsettling. What if we've been living that way all along? The brief history of the dead. Some cities never show up on a map. The one in this story? It's made entirely of memory. In the brief history of the dead, people who die don't move on right away. Instead, they wake up in a vast, modern city. Coffee shops, sidewalks, newspapers, the whole deal. The catch? You only stay there as long as someone alive on Earth still remembers you. When the last person who knew you dies, you vanish. Instantly. At first, it sounds almost comforting. An afterlife built out of remembrance. But think about it. How many people will truly hold you in their minds? And for how long? In this city, lives are extended by nothing more than fleeting memory. A barista who poured you coffee every morning. A neighbor who once borrowed your shovel. A stranger who remembers the way you smiled on a bus. Every fragment of recognition gives you another day. And when those memories fade, your existence does too. Meanwhile, back on Earth, a global plague is wiping out humanity. The city of the dead grows more crowded by the hour, and then emptier just as fast. Whole neighborhoods vanish overnight because entire bloodlines die in a week. The people in the afterlife realize the horrifying truth. Their eternity is tied to a world collapsing in real time. One woman, Laura, becomes the story's fragile anchor. Trapped in Antarctica, she might be the last living human, and therefore the last thread holding the entire city together. Everyone else in that strange metropolis is only alive because she remembers them. One survivor carrying the weight of an entire afterlife. And the terror isn't loud. There are no monsters clawing through walls, no demons tearing people apart. The horror comes from silence, streets collapsing because nobody remembers the baker anymore. Conversations cut short mid-sentence as someone blinks out of existence. Friends hugging you goodbye, not because they want to, but because they have no choice. The Brief History of the Dead is one of those books that makes you stare at your own reflection a little longer, not asking what you'll be remembered for, but whether you'll be remembered at all. It's a story where the apocalypse doesn't just kill the living, it erases the dead, twice. Foucault's Pendulum. If the Da Vinci Code is a fast food conspiracy, Foucault's Pendulum is a 7-course banquet. Dense, layered, and far more dangerous. Umberto Eco takes the ancient hunger for secret knowledge and twists it into a labyrinth that swallows both his characters and the reader whole. The story begins with 3 editors in Milan, intellectuals tired of sorting through bad manuscripts, filled with wild conspiracy theories about the Templars, the Rosicrucians, and hidden codes of the universe. As a joke, they decide to create their own plan. Using fragments of myths, symbols, and historical trivia, they stitch together a master conspiracy that explains everything. At first, it's satire, a playful intellectual game. But like quicksand, the deeper they go, the more it pulls them under. Because their invention doesn't stay fictional. Other people, real cultists, secret societies, fanatics, start believing in it. Their imaginary plan becomes fuel for obsession, drawing in those desperate for meaning in a chaotic world. And soon, the editors themselves can't tell what's real and what's the creation of their own clever minds. The pendulum itself, swinging silently in a Paris museum, becomes the symbol of it all. It's truth and illusion, science and mysticism, endlessly moving yet fixed at its center. Watching it, the characters realize their little game has turned into something cosmic, or perhaps revealed that the cosmos was always watching them. The darkest part of Eco's novel isn't just the conspiracies, but the way humans invent patterns when there are none. How easily we give meaning to randomness, how quickly we'll sacrifice sanity for the comfort of a story that explains everything. The book's ending delivers this terror in full. Their plan was never real, yet people are willing to kill, to die, and to lose themselves for it.